A massive request I've gotten in the last year and a half or so was a complete retrospective on the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series from Nickelodeon. This is because I devoted a large chunk of time to covering the 2003 TMNT cartoon in an 8-part retrospective. The response to that retrospective was so astonishingly positive, beyond my expectations anyway, that I knew I'd one day talk about this franchise again, and since this was the thing people wanted to see the most, let's get to it. If you watched part 1 of my 2003 retrospective, you'd have seen my rundown of the history of the TMNT that led to the 2003 series. Plus, if you're a fan, you'd probably know all of that anyway, so I won't repeat it. I'll instead give the bullet points to get us to the 2012 show. The Turtles debuted in the mid-1980s as an edgy comic spoofing contemporary comics. The creators felt like there was a real opportunity to turn it into a more significant franchise as the book grew in popularity. They tried getting action figures, but the toy company wanted a cartoon series first, and thus the 1987 TMNT cartoon was born, which really created the multimedia icon status the brand knows to this day. The show ran for 10 seasons, and its popularity was felt all over the globe as it spawned live-action movies and a truckload of merchandise. Though by the mid-90s there were some diminishing returns as the live-action sequels failed to live up to the standards of the first one, both critically and commercially, and the cartoon pivoted towards a darker tone when that was the in thing at the time. There was a bit of an implosion when they did the Next Mutation live-action series in 1997 that only ran for 1 season, and then the brand was not seen again for 5 years. The 2003 series was meant to be a full-scale reboot of the franchise, leaving the past behind and forging something new for a modern audience by taking the storyline of the original comics and trying to improve upon it while still maintaining the all-ages appeal. For a while, it was quite successful. The Turtles were back at the top for the early years of the new show's run. However, things got messy when its 4th season also pivoted towards a really dark direction that gave the network it was on cold feet as the 5th season was halted from airing and the show instead pivoted towards a brighter and sillier direction for its 6th and 7th seasons. Meanwhile, the network, 4Kids, was also not doing well and was approaching its demise in the late 2000s. The final note of the 2003 series was the film Turtles Forever, which was meant to celebrate the brand's 25th anniversary by bringing the original 87 Turtles back in a crossover with the 2000s Turtles. How you feel about the execution is a matter of opinion. But either way, that was the series finale. Similar to the time prior to the 2003 series, the time after this show was when the franchise took a bit of a break, but this time with a major shift in the status quo. For 25 years, the TMNT were owned by Mirage and had involvement from the creators, but in late 2009 it was announced that Viacom had purchased the global rights to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for $60 million, and they would begin conceptualizing a brand new CG animated series for Nickelodeon that would premiere in 2012. Now, as for me, I found all this pretty exciting. By this point, I had learned that I could use the internet to hear all the latest news and my favorite topics by typing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the Google News search bar, and that's how I found out that the 2000 series was ending and something new was starting. I guess it was sad that the version of the TMNT I accepted as the default would end, but I was still pretty excited to see something new come out. Especially once we started getting the teasers and cast announcements in 2012 and 2011. I was pretty excited, especially once 2012 hit and I found out that people on YouTube had uploaded the entire 2003 series and I was able to go back and properly watch the whole thing. This is how I became enough of a super fan of it to build the knowledge base I shared in my 2003 retrospective. 2012 was, as I have said, also the year the new show was going to come out, and I was pretty hyped for its release. However, the funny thing is, the reason it took me this long to review the 2012 show was because I've never watched it before. Makes no sense, right? Well, let me explain. I consumed every bit of news I could find related to the 2012 series before it came out and counted down the days for it to drop, only to not watch the show and never get around to it for 11 years. I mean, what happened? Well, I did watch the first few episodes as they aired when I was 11 going on 12, however I decided to stop watching the series a few weeks in because of 4 words. Different and therefore ruined. The 2003 Turtles and the 2007 movie were the things that shaped my understanding of the TMNT as a brand. So while I was excited to see a new version of the Turtles, subconsciously I had realized it had to exist within this strict boundary or I wasn't going to be interested in it. But that was never what the 2012 show was going to be. The attitude of the creatives behind this series was completely different from the one I had grown up with. Remember, the 2003 series was created in a time where the franchise was at an all-time low. The nostalgia wasn't really what they were going for. The comics were the significant influence and most references to the classic series were tongue-in-cheek.
Mikey, I told you, no more cowabunga!
Now, 10 years later, things were very different. The people who made the 2012 show were the generation of artists who grew up influenced by things like the 1987 Turtles. So this show was, as they said from the offset, a modernization of that classic series with influences from the comics and other versions, which is almost the exact opposite of what the 2003 series was. In fact, for the pre-release material for the 2012 series, it was such a celebration of the nostalgia from the old show and a discussion about how they were modernizing it that it almost felt like the 2003 series didn't even exist anymore. Part of why I felt like doing such an in-depth retrospective on it, if you recall. But yeah, the opening theme of the 2012 series is a new take on the classic theme, the comedy value is a large priority, and several episodes revolve around mutagen and mutations like the classic show. So I realized early on this wasn't a repeat of the 2003 series. I decided I didn't like it and gave up after about 9 or 10 episodes. So basically, I've never seen it. Admittedly, this made me really nervous about the idea of doing this video series because people have high expectations for it, but I wasn't sure if I could ever deliver since the 2003 retrospective was a product of more than a decade of watching, rewatching, researching, and thinking about that series. For example, I couldn't compile a funny list of inconsistencies or animation goofs in this show because I haven't watched it to the extent where I could. I couldn't establish points in this video that will pay off in 3 videos' time like the previous retrospective because I haven't seen what comes later in the series, so therefore I can only say what I know. I didn't want to let anyone down with these 2012 videos, since I knew it couldn't be the same as what I had done before since I had never seen this show before and wouldn't want to force it to be the same either. TMNT is one of the few fandoms where I would say I'm a known figure where I haven't pissed anybody off, and I really didn't want to change that. But I decided I was going to give this a chance and just tell the world what I thought of this show now that I'm not 12 years old anymore and can give it an honest try and research it to the best of my ability. Luckily, my doubts were put to rest when I was watching episodes 1 and 2, Rise of the Turtles. This episode introduced the new series pretty effectively. As is true for many animated shows, they put their best foot forward in terms of the animation for this one and demonstrated the varying skill levels between the different turtles and their personalities in one quick scene. The setup is that today is the 15th anniversary of Splinter and the Turtles being mutated by a mysterious ooze, prompting Splinter to retell the story of how it happened, which is a really natural way to quickly establish the backstory in this universe, while also making some elements of it mysterious, as this backstory is a small part of a larger conspiracy in this version. The reward for the Turtles turning 15 is that they're allowed to go to the surface world for the first time and discover what it has to offer. On the way, they find a father and daughter, Kirby and April O'Neil, being kidnapped by mysterious men in suits who are also carrying the mutagen that created them. In part 2, the Turtles try to rescue this family but only succeed in rescuing April, and what they discover is that this is an alien conspiracy by a race called the Krang who have some kind of world domination plot, and now that the Turtles are friends with April, they're going to work together to find out what the Krang are up to and stop it and save April's dad. But their antics fighting the Krang have alerted the Shredder to the fact that Splinter is teaching new students in New York and sets out to find them and finish what he started 15 years ago. As I said, I felt like this was a really well done series of pilot episodes, introducing us to almost every major character for the season, and establishing that there will be some classic TMNT elements here and accounted for, but many with new twists to keep it feeling fresh and lots of mysteries that later episodes will develop. The story and status quo continue to be built up throughout the following few episodes, making this the perfect time to talk about the main cast throughout the series and what makes them stand out in the 2012 incarnation. Even though I am eternally biased in favor of the 2000s Turtles, I grew to like these guys over the 26 episodes of Season 1. This is partially thanks to the actors who brought the characters to life. Leonardo is voiced by Jason Biggs, best known for his role in American Pie, which has, nothing to do with this show, but still, there'll be plenty of time to talk about him in a later part of this retrospective. Sean Astin plays Raphael, and he's been in a lot of movies, but the most interesting thing about him for me is that I actually know somebody who met him once. Not like at a con or anything, but in regular life. Thought that was a neat tidbit of info. Rob Paulson plays Donatello, and what was super interesting about that was that he had played Raphael for 9 of the 10 seasons of the '87 Turtles. The amount of voice work he had done made him someone that the producers really wanted to audition for Donatello, knowing full well how much turtle experience he already had. And he was very enthusiastic about coming back and doing a new take on it.
But I just wanted to make sure that they knew that I had been down that road before, and they weren't going to go say, oh, that's right, he was Raphael, let's just throw the old guy a bone. And their response was, no, we know exactly who you are. We like Pinky, and we like Yakko, and we love Raphael, and we love Carl from Jimmy Neutron, all this other stuff. We just think you'd be really ideal for our vision of Donatello. So, dude, I was happy to go read and astonished after 3 or 4 callbacks that they said, okay, guess what? You're getting another crack at this whole turtle thing. So I am out of my mind with excitement. It's great.
Lastly, Michelangelo was voiced by Greg Sipes, who's also pretty big in the voiceover world thanks to Teen Titans and the Ben 10 franchise. And he was also really passionate about Ninja Turtles and wanted to do the project. Together, they have a lot of chemistry, and the voices fit the characters really well.
Raph's been bitten by a giant poisonous robotic fish!
That's not possible. If he was bitten, it's venom, not poison.
I chalk that up to the fact that the legendary Andrea Romano was the voice director for this series. Anyone who's ever worked with her as a casting or voice director has had nothing but glowing things to say about how she relates to and works with actors.
Well, there's a lot of fight cues in the Turtles episodes, and so that when you're doing that for like a good half hour, straight, it can be a little taxing, so you gotta make sure we take ourselves a little bit of a break there. But fortunately, Andrea Romano, who's our director, is very conscious of that. So she tries to pull back on that as much as possible and try to get the fight attacks on the first take, so you don't have to constantly repeat it over and over again.
In voiceover, she's big on recording in an ensemble as it draws the best performances out of the actors, and in work she's involved in, that chemistry is palpable on the screen.
One of the things that they really wanted at the beginning of the season was to try to build chemistry, and so we were all together as much as possible, and I think that really, really helped. And now that we have a little bit more under our belt, we can kind of take that feeling with us as we go, but still we try to get together as much as we can.
But these Turtles being enjoyable to watch is also thanks to the writing. The T in TMNT always stood for teenage, but that usually meant very little in how the characters interacted. Mikey might have been more childish than the rest, but the others kept up with April and Casey like they were already adults. This version really focused on making the Turtles all feel like teens. Leo's drive to be a leader is based on his love of this Star Trek-style cartoon series that often foreshadows the plot of the episode. Raph is the angry one as usual, but I think this version spent the most amount of time on his sensitive side, giving him a non-mutated pet turtle to interact with. Donnie has this crush on April that is the most cringe thing to watch, but I mean that in the best possible way because they wrote it to make it feel like he's an actual dorky teen, played up to the 10th degree, like how he actually draws up a flowchart of everything she might say and what his response should be, and has planned every outcome. Though on that note, the most significant change to a core cast member in this version was April. And that's saying a lot because I don't think there have ever been two incarnations of April that have been identical. Her profession changes, her personality changes, and her ethnicity changes, which somehow only became a problem for freaky internet nerds recently. But back on target, this version of April was turned into a 15-year-old when she was normally double the Turtles' age. Making April a peer of the team changes the dynamic because it first allows them to tell stories they haven't before, like fighting inside of a school, and it created the opportunity for this crush plotline that further allowed the writers to show the Turtles' routines too. Generally, I just found this April to be an endearing character even after only one season.
Miss me? Yeah, actually. Last time I saw you, I forgot to give you this!
Making April another young acolyte of Splinter also serves a narrative purpose, as it gives him flashbacks of his actual daughter from his pre-mutated life. And what a segue that was. I've only seen one full season, and I think this might be my favorite version of Splinter of the ones I've seen. Portraying Master Splinter as the father of the Turtles over him just being their teacher is the norm, and already was by 2012, but I just like this version because they made the overprotective father scenes funny. I think it helps that Splinter, played by Hoon Lee, sounds real. Don't get me wrong, I love the 2003 Splinter, but the voice always sounded really overdone. This Splinter just sounds more natural and has more range in his performance, which made this version of the character more compelling. But I can get into more reasons why later. Splinter's backstory in this one is similar to the 1987 cartoon where Splinter used to be a ninjutsu master named Hamato Yoshi that got mutated into a rat alongside the Turtles. Despite my favorite TMNT incarnations using Splinter's backstory from the comics, I will say his being a human that got turned into a mutant rat was always something I felt was slightly more believable than his being a pet rat turned mutant that happened to observe a ninja master. Obviously, it's Ninja Turtles, so I can't say I'm here for realism, I'm just saying this backstory was one that I thought made Splinter a more believable ninja master. For whatever that's worth. Well, that's just about it for the core cast of good guys in Season 1. As I said, I was pretty impressed. I thought the main characters had a really good dynamic and the season made good use of those dynamics in its 26-episode run. But with well-done main characters, naturally that brings us into talking about the world around them. Before discussing any other character, I wanted to talk about the art design. Being a 3D animated series from over 10 years ago, I wasn't expecting my socks to be blown off, but for what it was worth, I thought the action scenes looked pretty good and kept the pace of the episodes up. The series just having a very comic book feeling to its world design, which I thought complemented the kind of basic buildings and such you'd see from a CG show from over a decade ago. Sometimes I feel like the visuals are a bit undersaturated, but that's pretty par for the course. The artists doing that thing that Teen Titans also did where they'd play around with the expressions to emphasize whatever characters are feeling, and I thought that was put to pretty good use. I also really like how the Turtles have pupils you can see, which further helps them emote, but in more important battle scenes, the characters have the all-white eyes from the comics of the 2003 series, so you get the best of both worlds on that front. In terms of design, I think these versions are some of my favorite Turtles ever drawn. Ever since the group's debut, each version has been distinguishing them more and more, as the comics made them all look exactly the same, the first cartoon created the multicolored headbands, and the 2003 series gave each turtle their own shade of green in their skin. But in each of these cases, the bodies were more or less exactly the same. I'd imagine in traditional animation, 4 characters who looked the same was probably easier to animate and keep things on model as much as possible, even though the 80s series struggled with that a lot anyway. Now that they are in 3D, each turtle can just get their own model, and they decided to play around with the designs, making them all different heights, giving them different head shapes, eye colors, facial details, and body types. Donatello is the tallest and skinniest, for example. Raphael is the bulkiest, and Michelangelo is the shortest and has freckles. In the incarnations that have followed this one, I have felt that the designs were a little too distinguished, to the point where I feel like the Ninja Turtles have become somewhat over-designed. Like, we get it, Don is smart. He doesn't need to wear glasses and have a bunch of tech on him at all times. Simply making him the tallest and skinniest and giving him the gap in his teeth really gets the job done. He's weaker physically, but then we see he's the smartest via personality. But my point is, these are my favorite designs of the Turtles that I've ever seen. This version of the Turtles really sets itself apart with the villains, though. The first major threat is the Krang, the alien race from Dimension X. I thought this was a cool new way to fuse together old concepts. Krang was a villain from Dimension X that worked with Shredder in the 87 series, loosely based on the idea of the Utroms from the comics, tiny aliens that lived in the stomachs of human robots. The Krang fused these two ideas together by making them a whole alien species that are out to rule the Earth and operate in the TCRI building. Having a whole bunch of them makes them easy cannon fodder for the Turtles in the action scenes, but from a story perspective, I like how they tried to do something new with old concepts rather than just redoing what's been done or trying to reinvent the wheel. I also like the gimmick with the Krang where Nolan North voiced all of them as they talk in this really bizarre fashion.
This is going to leave that which is known as a mark. Affirmative.
Shredder is, of course, the main antagonist of the series, expertly played by Kevin Michael Richardson. I like how in the first season, Shredder only fights the Turtles twice, but he remains a threatening figure throughout all the episodes because he's responsible for all the plots, and the Turtles can barely beat his right-hand men, and they really get brought down to reality when he kicked their asses 9 episodes in when they were starting to get overconfident. Shredder begins an alliance with the Krang when he realizes that they're both fighting the Turtles and that the Krang's mutagen was responsible for turning 2 of his best guys into mutant freaks, Dog Pound and Fish Face. Which is another example of the show doing things that are familiar but new. Shredder having mutant henchmen is obviously a callback to the 87 series, but instead of just bringing back Bebop and Rocksteady, they created new characters with new personalities that have different dynamics with each of the Turtles than previously seen characters. And yes, I do know that Bebop and Rocksteady do appear in this series, but I'm just saying that at the start they opted to do something new. But that's not to say there aren't plenty of TMNT staples here unaccounted for. In fact, many of them are here in the first season. Just 5 episodes in, they introduce Baxter Stockman, who is, as usual, responsible for the Mouser robots. Now, I don't think any version of Stockman could ever compare to the 2003 version, see the previous retrospective for more information, but having said that, I liked this take. Phil Lamar plays him, and while he's a genius here, he's less competent than his 2003 incarnation and more of a joke character. I found the jokes at his expense, like nobody remembering his name, landed pretty well. In episode 12, they introduced Leatherhead as a product of the Krang's mutation that's trying to stop the coming invasion and becomes an ally of the Turtles, while dealing with his usual anger problems that he takes out by grabbing Donatello's face, which I thought was funny as well. Then you meet the man who becomes the Rat King in episode 7, and then he fully transforms in episode 13, I, Monster, which calls back to the same movie the Rat King's debut episode in the 2003 series did, fun fact. The Rat King in this was played by Jeffrey Combs, who fans of my channel at least may recognize because he voiced the Question on Justice League Unlimited and the Scarecrow in the new Batman adventures. That parallel was made in my mind since the design of the Rat King in this series kinda reminded me of the Scarecrow from TNBA. But anyway, the season really wastes no time as Shredder's daughter, Karai, is introduced in just 14 episodes. She has a back and forth with Leonardo as you'd come to expect from other incarnations, but this became the most compelling ongoing plotline of the season for me. The reason is that Splinter used to be Hamato Yoshi, like I said. Similar to other versions of Hamato Yoshi, he was with a woman named Tang Shen, and they had a daughter named Miwa. Oroku Saki, Shredder, was Yoshi's friend until his jealousy led to the deaths of Tang Shen and Miwa and started their bitter rivalry. This is fusing together a lot of the Splinter backstories into one, and I think it was for the best, as it makes the Splinter v Shredder dynamic more personal than it usually is, while also having Oroku Saki fulfill Mashimi's role in previous incarnations. Later on, it's revealed that Shredder had kidnapped Miwa and raised her himself with the idea that Hamato Yoshi is the reason her mother is dead. Miwa is Karai. And having not seen any of the rest of the show, I'm very interested in seeing where they're going with this plotline in particular because it's pretty unfamiliar territory as a TMNT fan. It was revealed to Splinter in the last episode of the season, and these are my favorite scenes. Splinter didn't really get much in the way of fight scenes this season, but you could tell how powerful he was in what brief glimpses we did get. And so when he goes to Shredder's lair to save April while the Turtles are fighting the Krang to stop the Technodrome, you get to see how actually powerful Splinter is, and it was pretty cool, I must say. It was a really good season finale too, as it provided a satisfactory conclusion to all the things the previous episodes built up while leaving plenty of room for more. Although I did notice one tiny inconsistency where the Turtles raid TCRI and try to destroy the Krang portal. They seemed shocked that it has a shield surrounding it, which led to a funny moment.
Why didn't you tell me?
Well, because I wanted us to fail.
Obviously I didn't know!
But I noticed that that was the whole point of the climax in episode 17, TCRI, where they first go there and see the portal has an impenetrable shield. Actually, while editing this, I realized I was completely wrong about this, and that is not what happens in episode 17. Not sure why I thought it was, because when the shield was revealed in episode 25, I thought this is a contradiction of episode 17. Somehow I already knew the portal had a shield around it, but I got the plot mixed up. But I figured I'd leave this point in anyway because I thought that clip I just played was a genuinely funny moment. But other than that, I thought this was a really good last episode with some of my favorite moments all season, and it made me interested to watch season 2 as the Krang are still out there, Shredder's still going to hunt Splinter and the Turtles, and then there's still the matter of Karai learning the truth. And that is certainly a compliment for a show I've never seen before and was never really interested in watching before deciding to make these videos. The show was high quality enough to where it had won me over by the end. I thought it was an endearing season of television, a fun adventure for all ages that is equal parts fresh and familiar for longtime fans of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it got all the accolades you'd expect. Like the prior two TMNT cartoons, it really kickstarted a new era of Turtle Mania, each episode in the first season netting over 2 million viewers per episode in the US alone, and the merchandise flew off the shelves in the holiday season of 2012 going into 2013. The series being renewed for Season 2 on October 2nd of 2012, just a few days after the series premiere on September 28th. It was just immediately obvious they had a hit in their hands and they weren't going to let it go to waste. Which I think is a good spot to cut it off for part 1 of this retrospective. I've set the scene and gave my thoughts on Season 1 of the show and found out that I think it's pretty cool. I'm sure it's never going to top the 2003 series for me, but it's a pretty swell series nevertheless. So in part 2, we'll talk about the merchandising of this era of Turtles and Season 2, just like the 03 retrospective. So I hope people look forward to that, and I hope everyone who's been waiting for this thought it was a good video. So with that said, I'll close the video by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.